Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide.
Hi, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
We decided to do our episode a little differently today. I think we're going to have a good time with it.
Yeah, I like these episodes.
Where we're a little bit off the cuff like this one.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're both bobbing our heads to off the cuff. That must be a thing. Something about freedom.
Yeah. Freedom. Okay.
When we originally, Allison and I sat in a restaurant having lunch talking about the possibility of podcasting together, our original notion was that we wanted to put information out in the world for families because we felt that early childhood education was evolving so much and so rapidly that, you know, I'm teaching teachers to do something, for example, and families are not understanding it. And there was this is a gap between what early educators were being asked to do at that point as part of the grand changes that are still taking place and how we teach young children, and what families understood to be good early education. So we sat together and, you know, Allison said that she was thinking about, you know, how to put information out there. And we started to brainstorm how to put information out there and what type. And again, it was originally our notion was that this was for families, for people who are not entrenched in early education. Since that time, though, which now is several years ago, we've learned that many professionals listen to this podcast, enjoy this podcast, write to us for advice and information. And we're going to get to something at the end of this episode. Someone wrote to us with a question. We'll give you an example of that as our feedback 5 today. Many professionals listen. They recommend particular episodes sometimes to families. They recommend the podcast to families. But a lot of the crux of who's listening are professionals. So we thought, you know, whether a professional is listening and going to recommend episodes maybe, or they've posted it on their website. I know we're on many programs' websites, or you're a family. We thought this would kind of be a fun topic to put out there because it goes back to our original mission, which was to educate the general public about early education.
Right. Which is why the podcast was called How Preschool Teachers Do It, because we thought families want to know how we do things. That's why we named it that. And then it turned into like everyone was listening, including preschool teachers. So it was like,
and not only preschool teachers, but also like families, grandparents, homeschoolers, administrators, like everybody's listening. So we thought it is awesome. We thought it would be kind of fun to put out this episode. We're each going to name our top 3 things that we wish families knew. And that's why the title of the episode is If Only Parents Knew, parents being a catch-all phrase for anyone raising young children. So it could be parents, grandparents, whoever you are, anyone interacting with young children. This is what we wish you knew. So I guess, Allison, do you want me to start with my top 3 and then you go to your top 3?
All right. Yeah, that works. Okay.
Because I'm asking one of my top 3 relates to one of her top 3.
Okay. So maybe you do do you want to do your number 1 and then I do my number 1? Because I think my number 3 lines up with your number 3.
I think we have that wrong. I'll just go through them.
Just go through
now.
Thing,
like, am I really spending my time listening to these 2 debate this? Shouldn't they have planned this before? I'll just go through mine and then we'll.
Sadly, we did plan it before, and then we just whatever.
We dropped that ball. Sorry, folks.
Yeah. Sorry.
You know, there are a lot of people out there who write and say, "I love when you're just sort of working things out and you're just people on this podcast." So I guess that's this episode.
We are people. Yes, there's that.
Yeah. So here's my list. My number 1 thing that I wish families really knew, understood, grasped, and loved is that play is how most learning takes place. So when educators or anyone who's with your children says to you, "We learn through play," you should be like, "Yay!" Because more learning takes place, not, "Oh no, how are they going to learn?" Play is how it takes place. And I think I've said this before in the podcast, but I often say it during professional development, so I'm not sure. Fred Rogers taught us that play is how children practice the skills that they are learning and add on to those skills by experimenting through their play. So that's the first thing I wish, that everyone really fully understood and grasped and accepted that play is actually how children learn best, not worksheets, not flashcards, not memorizing things, not all those things. Okay.
Yeah.
My number 2, I feel like there should be a drum roll. We need to get that together. Thank you.
Drumming on my computer.
Thank you. That wasn't quite it. My number 2 is that behavior is taught. Children are born with a temperament, but they have to learn all behavior. Children are not born knowing your expectations, my expectations, or anybody else's expectations. All behavior is taught, and children can learn different expectations for different people and places. Yeah. So any assumption you have about, you know better than to do that, guess again. Yeah. My number 3, Allison will go there soon. My number 3 is that in every interaction that you have with children, you send one of 2 messages. One message is, I believe in you. You're capable and you can do anything. And the other message is, I don't believe in you. I don't think you're good enough and I don't think you can do it. And so we have to really think about the words coming out of our mouths and how the child will hear them. Because without any bad intent in prior generations, they said things to us that were not good for our self-esteem.
Yeah. But I think we know better now.
I would like to think we do. So think before you speak is what you're saying to the children, even when they need to be corrected and even when something's gone wrong, is what you are saying, affirming their ability to be capable, to fix it, to do better, is it affirming or is it demeaning? Because we either are affirming or demeaning. And that's my list.
Okay. So now I should do my list.
Allison, take it away.
All right. My number 1 was that children have emotions just like we do. And they shouldn't be denied those emotions. They shouldn't be made to feel shameful because they have emotions. They will get mad and upset and sad, just like I get mad and upset and sad. And we need to teach them how to handle those emotions in an appropriate way. But when I was growing up, it was like, no, you weren't allowed to be mad. You weren't allowed to be sad. It was like, you're a kid. You should just be happy all the time. And it's still true, right? Yeah. And that made me not really know how to deal with these emotions as an adult, which is probably why the mental health profession is getting a lot of money from people like us. So children have emotions. They are human beings. I think most of mine go along the lines of, they're also human beings. Okay. My number 2 was, children are not constantly trying to manipulate you. They are learning these behaviors. Like Cindy said, behavior is learned. It is taught. They don't know, they're not trying to get a rise out of you. They're not trying to trick you and just to get you mad. They're not trying to manipulate you. They're kids going through normal development, so even like our last episode, children will go through a period of lying. They're not lying just to make you mad. They're lying because they're experimenting with what the truth is and how to tell stories and how to do things. They're not trying to manipulate you. They're not out to get you. They're not trying to trick you. And my number 3 is, children are humans, but they're not adults. And I think there's a lot of people out there that think oh, you know better than that. It's like, no, they don't. There's some adults that don't know better than that, but you can't expect children to know everything that you know. Because the reason why you know it is because you grew up, and you went through these experiences to learn it. Children haven't had that yet. They're not just mini adults, they're working through things and they're learning.
And they have to have the experiences themselves. Let's face it.
Yes.
As a parent, I could tell my children from now till doomsday about what I experienced, but until they go through it themselves, they don't.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are my top 3.
And before we go on talking about any of this, I'm thinking that in a future episode that you all should stay tuned to the podcast, because I would also like to do in a future episode the top 3 things that I wish teachers knew from maybe
Okay.
the viewpoint of a family.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
Top 3 things teachers know. Okay.
So when we think about these things, the things that we wish that families knew, I think that as I was listening to you and even kind of listening to myself say it, I think that families deep down know these things, and we have emotional gut reactions to things that happen. And instead of acting on what these truths that we really know, that being frustrated or fearful or upset impacts our behavior. And so it seems like we behave in ways that indicate that we don't know these things when we're dealing with our own children. We're emotionally bound up in our own kids. And so.
Yeah. And I feel like parents want what's best for their kids, and they're given all this information from so many different people, the teacher and their parents, the grandparents, society, culture, media is telling you all this stuff, and you don't I don't know what the truth is here, but I want what's best for my kid, and I'm so afraid I'm going to do something wrong, so it's all this pressure of you deep down might know what is the right thing to do here based on all of those things, but can you implement it without, you know what I mean? So it gets a little hairy there, I think,
And I think just like any human being, there are actions that we take that we don't deeply think about. We don't think about what is the long-term impact going to be. And I'll just give you one example of that. It can be something like putting certain pictures of your children or information about your children on social media when they're too young to give permission. What is the long-term impact on my children? Is something that we should be asking about that, but not only about that, but also about all things that we do with our children. What is the long-term impact here? I don't know that we always take time out to ask that question, but if I could add a number 4 to my 3s list here, I think that my number 4 would be that I wish that parents knew that social media is not the best way to share their children's lives, because it's out there for everybody. And if you wouldn't stand in a room screaming this thing in front of people you barely know, or holding up the pictures in front of people you barely know, then please don't do it on social media. There are some famous people who don't allow pictures of their children on social media, and I have to say that I admire them for it.
Wasn't there just a really big story of this very, very famous person who is very upset that somebody posted I don't know if I want to say his name. Am I allowed to say his name?
I don't know.
Posted pictures of his children, and he actually said, he's like, listen, I'm a celebrity. I made that decision to be in the limelight. My children did not.
But it's the same for somebody who's not a celebrity. I'm making the decision to post something. My child did not make that decision. They're the ones who are going to have to live with it their whole lives. What am I doing?
Yeah.
You know who comes to mind when I think of people who don't want their children being photographed or in social media? Harry and Meghan. No matter how you feel about Harry and Meghan, they do deeply protect their children. And I know, they're so big and famous that there are many life-threatening reasons for that.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's also really good for their kids' psyche. They very, very much protect their children's identity and their image and their personal lives. And there are people out there belittling them for that, as if we have a right to their children.
That's what I was going to say.
I don't have a right to their children.
You don't have a right to anyone's children. I have this issue with people taking pictures at the park, and be like, okay, but those aren't your kids, so you shouldn't take this cute little picture of oh, look what I saw at the park and post it on your social media when you have no right to that child or that photo or that parent. It's just or anybody. It doesn't even have to be kids. Just because I'm in public does not make me public property.
So obviously Alison and I have a lot to say about that, but going back Going
Yeah,
back to our top
clearly.
Sorry. Going back to
Sorry.
our top three. I told you we were going to be a little more loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
So, I think that if this episode is shared with families, that if it's going to be shared, that we need to say, here's a podcast that we recommend, and here's an episode of what these two people wish that families knew, but they have also a lot of episodes about a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Because I feel like many of our episodes could be helpful in educating
sure.
families.
Yeah.
We actually even had an episode that people really liked about normalizing family education. So hopefully you will use this episode to normalize family education and to say, you can be educated. Families can get information in a lot of ways. It doesn't have to only be my family education programs. Doesn't only have to be the articles I send home to you. It can also be decent podcasts like this one. And speaking of decent podcasts, we are still number 2. We just checked the rankings. Number 2 among preschool topic,
early childhood topic
podcasts. So thank you all for that. What were you just going to say, Alison? You look like you were going to add something.
Oh, I was going to say that even though parents get all this information, articles that I might send or wherever they're here, sometimes they still don't believe it. And I know that this is true because when COVID first hit, I remember having multiple discussions when schools were closed about, oh, but now my child's not getting the education that they need. And I remember having this conversation with a parent who I said, but as long as she's playing, she's learning. And the parent goes, really? Because I don't think that's true. And I don't know how many times we have had that discussion and parents have heard like, hey, if they're playing, they're learning. If they're playing, they're learning. If they're playing, they're learning. And still, when it comes down to it, they just don't believe it's true.
Okay, but what did we learn in a prior episode? That the more humans hear something, the more they believe it to be truth. So share this episode.
Yeah, share this episode. Yeah.
All right, so let's do our feedback 5, shall we?
We shall.
We recently received through our website, howpreschoolteachersdoit.com, we received the contact form from Rachel, who works at a Head Start in look, I'm messing it up, in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Too loosey-goosey today, guys.
Yeah, right? Relax. Rachel, who works at a Head Start in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Hello, Head Start in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Yeah.
And Alison actually answered her question. It was an excellent question. So we're sharing it as our feedback 5. Alison, go ahead and let everybody know the question and your answer.
All right. So Rachel wrote us about the showing evidence of learning by making and using graphs episode. She wrote, I just listened to the episode about showing evidence of learning to parents, and I was wondering, what do you suggest to do with the graphs that are made without making the classroom look overwhelming and messy? Do you have any suggestions? Which I found to be an excellent question, because you don't want your class being overwhelming, too much clutter. Teachers struggle with this all the time, what to put up and what to keep up and how much to have in the classroom. So what I've done in the past is I've taken pictures, like once the unit was over, like the graph would hang up while we're doing that unit, that topic. But once it was over, I would take a picture of it. And then I would make these books for the kids about everything we did for that unit. So like one that comes to mind is we did this long unit about trees, and we would go outside and we would measure the trees, and we had graphs of like what tree was tallest and whatnot. And I remember I took pictures of that graph. I have pictures of the kids measuring the trees, and I would put it all together in a book. And then they had this big long book, and I would keep the book in the book area, and they could read it whenever they wanted. And those became their favorite books because they were the main characters of it. They created it, they experienced it. And it helped with their reading too, because they're like, oh, I know what we did here. I know this word says tree, so that's what, and then I would get rid of the big graphs that were hanging on the walls because I'd have pictures of them in these books. And then if a parent ever said, hey, I really would like to see evidence of learning, I'd be like, well, here's the book, here's everything we did. And it kind of compiled it all together. So that's what I used to do with things, but I'm sure there's a lot of other really cool things that people have done. So.
Well, if they
have,
write us
and tell us,
they can write us, and tell us, and when we come across some good ideas, we share some of them. I love the idea of take pictures of it all and put it in a book that becomes a narration of the project or the study or the topic that we
Yeah.
did, because it also allows children to revisit their thinking and their
Yes.
work. So
Yeah.
thank you for the question, Rachel, that prompted us to
Yeah.
talk about take pictures of things and create books that you can
Yeah.
keep in the classroom for the children. All you need is a binder and some page protectors,
Yep.
folks.
That's it.
To create
That's it.
books.
That's all I made my books at. Because a lot of people say, but we don't have that fancy machine. I'm like, you don't need a fancy
You
machine.
don't need it.
You don't need that.
No.
You don't need that. Kids don't care if it's in a binder. They think that's cool. You know,
Right.
and as long as it's protected, you're fine. You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
No big deal.
And they do become the books that you make with the children in a classroom at every age become the most popular books.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, folks. And we hope that you will contact us with your top 3 things that you wish
Yes, I
people
want to
knew.
hear everybody else's top 3 things.
Yes, please do. And if we
Please.
we may come up with a list of what were your top 3 things, we will share them.
Oh yeah, if you give us permission.
If you give us permission. You know, when Rachel wrote to us, she said, I give you permission to use my name and location. So we did. And
Thank you.
give that some thought. What are the top 3 things you all wish people knew? We will get to an episode about what we wish teachers knew. And so stay tuned. Keep listening to the podcast. We'll catch you another time.
Bye, Pete's.